Cheap suit, which garbage truck did you get that thing from? That's the first thing Richard Harlow says when the young man walks into the boardroom that morning. Not, good morning, not, welcome. Just those two words, spat out like something sour on his tongue. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more jaw-dropping stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's get back to our main character. Cheap suit, which garbage truck did you get that thing from? That's the first thing Richard Harlow says when the young man walks into the boardroom that morning. Not, good morning, not, welcome. Just those two words, spat out like something sour on his tongue. And the room laughs. Not loud laughter, but that kind that hums under the breath, polite, poisonous, safe. You can hear it ripple through the air. The sound of approval. The sound of conformity. The meeting hasn't even started yet, and already the stage is set. It's 8:47 in the morning, in the glass-walled boardroom of Harlow Dynamics, a billion-dollar tech conglomerate where everything gleams except for the people's souls. The executives sit around an oval table polished so bright it reflects the fluorescent ceiling lights. Their voices are crisp, expensive, deliberate. Every sentence smells like money and entitlement. And then there's him, Malcolm Pierce. 28 years old. Quiet. Calm. The kind of calm that makes loud men nervous. He's wearing a gray suit that doesn't shine under the light, a tie that isn't designer, shoes that have walked further than anyone else's in the room. And that's all they see. Not his eyes. Not his intelligence. Not the way he carries silence like authority. Just the price tag that doesn't match theirs. Who let the intern into the executive meeting? Richard asks, his voice dripping with amusement. Or is this some kind of bring your assistant to work day I missed the memo on? More laughter. This time louder. Malcolm just stands there at the far end of the table, holding a leather folder under his arm. He doesn't respond. He doesn't flinch. He just breathes. Slowly. Measured. As though he's counting each breath to keep something much bigger inside. Richard leans back in his chair. Son, the mailroom's that way, he says, pointing toward the door without even looking at him. This table's reserved for people who actually make decisions. For a moment, no one moves. The kind of silence that feels dangerous, not because of the words, but because of what's left unsaid. Malcolm's voice is soft when it finally cuts through the air. I was invited, he says. Invited? Richard repeats, pretending confusion. By whom? HR? The janitorial committee? A few chuckles. Malcolm doesn't smile. By the board. That word, board, lands like a small pebble in a still pond. You can hear the ripples in the air. Someone clears their throat. Someone else shuffles a chair. Richard scoffs. Well, the board doesn't exactly summon interns for morning tea. Maybe you got your calendar mixed up, champ. He turns to the others, raising his voice. Gentlemen, let's begin. The agenda is the quarterly losses, the pending layoffs, and apparently, today's entertainment. The others pretend not to hear the insult, but the tension is there, thick, sharp, unavoidable. Malcolm stays standing. If I may, he says quietly. Before you start, there's a matter I'd like to address. Richard waves a hand. We're not taking coffee orders, son. Have a seat, outside. Malcolm doesn't move. It'll only take a few minutes. And something about the tone, the calm certainty, makes Richard pause. For the first time, he really looks at him. Not as an intern, not as a mistake, but as someone who doesn't blink when mocked. Richard narrows his eyes. You've got 2 minutes, he says. Use them wisely. Malcolm nods once. I intend to. He places his folder gently on the table. You can hear the soft thud as it lands, deliberate, final. Then he looks around the room, scanning faces that still don't recognize him. Some glance away. Some smirk. One woman at the far end, the only black executive in the room, leans forward slightly, her breath catching, as though she senses what's coming. Malcolm says, "My name is Malcolm Pierce." Richard interrupts immediately. "Noted. You can drop off your resume with HR after this. We'll keep it on file for when we need another coffee runner." The room titters again. Malcolm doesn't respond. He simply continues, "I was asked to attend today's meeting to discuss leadership continuity and upcoming structural changes." The words "leadership continuity" draw a few confused murmurs. The CFO tilts his head. The HR director looks up from her tablet. Richard smirks. "Leadership? Son, the only structure you're changing today is the coffee station. I appreciate the enthusiasm, but let's stick to your lane, all right?" Malcolm opens the folder. "Actually," he says softly, "that's exactly what I'm here to discuss." There's something about his tone, not defiant, not timid, that cuts through the arrogance in the room. Calm authority. The kind that doesn't ask for permission to exist. And for a fleeting second, Richard hesitates. But pride has a way of being louder than reason. "Listen, Malcolm," he says, leaning forward. "I get it. You're ambitious. You want to make an impression. But this," he gestures to the table, "is where experience speaks. Where money talks. And right now, you're overdressed for the mailroom but underqualified for this conversation. So do us all a favor and sit down." Malcolm finishes gently. "No, thank you. I'll stand." Richard's jaw tightens. "Excuse me?" "I said I'll stand," Malcolm repeats. His voice is steady, patient. It's easier to speak truth when you're not trying to fit in a chair you weren't meant to sit in. The sentence lands heavier than expected. A few heads turn. Someone whispers under their breath, "What did he just say?" Richard forces a laugh. "Truth? That's rich. You know what truth looks like, son. Truth wears Armani. Truth drives a Bentley. Truth runs billion-dollar companies. Not thrift store suits and discount shoes." And just like that, the laughter returns, loud, confident, cruel. Malcolm doesn't say a word. He just listens. The way someone listens to a clock ticking before an explosion. When the laughter dies down, he says quietly, "Maybe you're right. Maybe truth doesn't wear Armani. Maybe truth doesn't drive a Bentley. Maybe truth walks into a room where it's not welcome, and waits." The silence that follows lasts exactly 5 seconds. Then Richard snorts. "This is ridiculous." "Security." "Mr. Harlow," interrupts the woman at the end of the table, "maybe let him finish." Richard glares at her. "Lisa, please. You're HR, not a motivational speaker." But Malcolm lifts a hand. "It's all right," he says. "I'm almost done." He closes the folder and looks at Richard again. "Do you believe in merit?" Richard blinks. "What?" "Merit," Malcolm repeats. "Do you believe people should earn their place here based on skill, effort, and contribution, not how much their suit costs?" Richard laughs dismissively. "Of course. This is a meritocracy. You work hard, you rise up. Simple as that." "Interesting," Malcolm murmurs. "Then I suppose today will be a very revealing day for all of us." And with that, he picks up his folder again, nods once, and turns toward the board's assistant by the door. "Could you let them know we're ready to begin?" he asks. The assistant hesitates. Who exactly should I call, sir?" Malcolm's lips curve slightly, though not in amusement. "The board," he says. "They'll know what to do." He walks toward the window and rests a hand on the cold glass. Outside, the city hums, unaware that in this very room, reputations are about to collapse. Behind him, Richard mutters, "He's insane." The CFO whispers back, who invited him again? The HR director frowns. He said the board did. At that moment, the door opens again. The assistant re-enters, slightly breathless. They're on their way, she says quietly. Who? Richard snaps. The board members, she replies. They said it's time. Time for what? Malcolm turns around slowly. You'll see, he says. And just like that, the air shifts. You can hear it, the change, the unease, the uncertainty. The laughter dies. The pride begins to tremble. The clock ticks louder. Somewhere in that silence, someone whispers, "Who is this guy?" And that's how it begins. Because in 8 minutes, the man they mocked for his cheap suit, the one they called an intern, a mailroom clerk, a nobody, will show them who truly runs this company. But for now, all they can hear is the ticking clock, counting down to the moment everything changes. If that moment caught your breath, keep listening, because what happens next will make you question everything you think you know about power and perception. Share this story with someone who's ever been judged by what they wear, not who they are. The clock on the wall clicks softly. 8:55. Richard's laughter has faded, but his pride hasn't. He sits at the head of the table, for now, fingers drumming against the polished surface, impatience rising in every tap. The other executives glance between him and Malcolm, unsure where to look, unsure which direction power is about to move. Then the door opens. Footsteps. More than one set. Heavier. Confident. The kind of walk that makes conversation stop midway. A voice says, "Good morning, everyone." The room straightens. 3 people enter, the senior board representatives, older, composed, carrying the weight of the company's authority in their tone. The woman in front, Eleanor Grant, speaks first. "Mr. Harlow," she says calmly, "we understand there's been some confusion this morning." Richard forces a smile. Confusion? No, not at all. Just a bit of, enthusiasm from one of our interns here. He gestures lazily toward Malcolm. Young man wanted to play dress-up for the big leagues. Eleanor doesn't respond. Her eyes rest on Malcolm instead. "Mr. Pierce," she says softly, "thank you for waiting." The entire room freezes. "Mr. Pierce," the CFO repeats under his breath, confused. Richard's smile falters. "You know him?" Eleanor nods once. "Of course. He's the reason we're all here." And there it is, the first crack in the silence. You can almost hear the sound of pride fracturing. Richard blinks. "Excuse me?" Malcolm turns from the window, calm as ever. "It's all right, Eleanor," he says. "We can continue." Eleanor folds her hands. "As per protocol, I'll begin the formal introduction for record keeping. Effective as of this morning, by unanimous vote and ownership confirmation, the new chairman of Harlow Dynamics is..." Richard interrupts, his voice rising. Wait, what? What are you talking about?" Eleanor looks at him. "Mr. Pierce." The room erupts, whispers, gasps, disbelief. Richard stands abruptly. "This is absurd. This kid's not even on the payroll. He's... Malcolm speaks for the first time since the board entered. His voice is calm, measured. "A controlling shareholder, Mr. Harlow. As of last quarter. The acquisition was handled quietly, for reasons I believe you're about to understand." The murmurs turn into low conversations. Someone says, "Controlling shareholder?" Another whispers, "Impossible." Richard's face flushes red. That's ridiculous. No one buys a controlling stake in a billion-dollar corporation without the CEO knowing. Unless, Malcolm replies gently, the CEO is too busy mocking people to read his own reports. The words land heavy. The silence that follows could split glass. Eleanor clears her throat. "The documentation was sent to your office last week, Mr. Harlow. We received confirmation from your assistant that it was signed and acknowledged." Richard stammers. My assistant? That's impossible, I didn't. Malcolm tilts his head. Would you like me to read it aloud? He opens his folder again. The sound of paper sliding echoes faintly, every movement slow, deliberate, surgical. Acquisition File 14B-6, he says. Pierce Holdings LLC. Acquisition of 52.3% outstanding shares of Harlow Dynamics. Transfer completed and approved by SEC review. Signed, by Richard Harlow, CEO. He pauses. Date, October 3rd. Time, 4:12 p.m. Richard's mouth opens, but no sound comes out. Someone mutters, 4:12, that was the day he left early for that charity dinner. Malcolm's tone is almost sympathetic. Your assistant handled it efficiently. She thought it was part of your usual partner transactions. You might want to thank her for her diligence. Eleanor interjects smoothly. For the record, Mr. Harlow, the board approved the transition in full compliance with company bylaws. As of this morning, Malcolm Pierce is officially our new chairman. The room is silent. Utterly silent. Malcolm walks closer to the table, his steps unhurried. He sets the folder down again and looks around. Now that introductions are out of the way, he says softly, shall we proceed with the meeting? You can almost feel the weight of every heartbeat. Richard finally finds his voice, though it trembles. This is some kind of trick. You can't just walk in here and take over my company. Malcolm looks at him, calm. Your company? He shakes his head slightly. No, Richard. It was never truly yours. It was built by people whose names you don't remember, whose work you don't acknowledge, whose ideas you take credit for. He glances toward the others. And today, we're going to change that. Richard scoffs, trying to recover some authority. You think you can waltz in here in that cheap suit and, lecture us on leadership? Malcolm's voice doesn't rise. I don't have to lecture anyone. I just have to lead. The HR director, Lisa, speaks softly. Mr. Pierce. I had no idea. Malcolm nods. You weren't meant to. I wanted to see how this company treats those it considers beneath it. I wanted to listen to how people speak when they believe no one important is listening. He looks back at Richard. And now I know. Richard tries to laugh again, but it sounds forced. Oh, so this was all some morality test? Some dramatic social experiment? Malcolm answers simply, a truth test. The CFO clears his throat. Sir, if I may, why would someone like you invest in us at all? With all due respect, there are cleaner companies, better optics, fewer controversies. Malcolm's gaze doesn't waver. Because the dirt is where growth begins. I believe this company can still become something better, but not under leadership that ridicules its own people. Eleanor sits, gesturing to the others. Let's continue with the agenda, Chairman Pierce. Richard slams a hand on the table. No. This is not happening. I won't sit here and he stops himself mid-sentence, but the word he almost said burns in the air. Malcolm's tone turns colder. Go on, Richard. Let a what? Richard looks away. Let a black man run the company you've been exploiting for a decade? Malcolm says it plainly, unflinchingly. Let someone who doesn't fit your picture of power sit in the chair you thought would always be yours? The silence that follows is deafening. Then Malcolm continues, quieter. I know what you think of me. I heard it before I even entered the room. Intern. Mailroom. Cheap suit. You've built a culture that measures worth by brand names and complexion, not by integrity or skill. But today, he says, his voice steady as steel, that changes. Richard's breathing quickens. You have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, I do, Malcolm interrupts, calm again. I've spent years listening to the stories of those you've silenced. The engineers who left because they were mocked in meetings. The women who were passed over for promotions because they didn't laugh at your jokes. The interns who were told their accents made them sound unprofessional. He pauses. I know exactly what kind of company this is, Richard. And I also know what it's about to become. For the first time, Richard looks uncertain. What are you planning to do? Malcolm leans slightly closer, lowering his voice. You'll see soon enough. But before we get there, I need you to answer one question. Richard hesitates. What question? Why did you mock me? What? When I walked in, Malcolm says, his tone still calm. You saw a man you didn't recognize. You assumed he was beneath you. You laughed. You called my suit cheap. Why? Richard shifts uncomfortably. It was a joke. I didn't mean anything by it. Malcolm nods slowly. Of course. You never do. That's the problem. The words hang in the air like smoke. Eleanor speaks softly. Chairman Pierce, perhaps we should move forward with the operational review. Malcolm raises a hand. In a moment. I think Mr. Harlow deserves to understand what leadership looks like before we discuss numbers. Richard glares. You think humiliating me makes you a leader? No, Malcolm says quietly. I think it exposes one. The HR director shifts uncomfortably. Chairman Pierce, the team is unsettled. I know, Malcolm says. Change always feels like that. He takes a slow breath, then addresses the whole table. When I started investing in companies like this, I didn't look for profit margins. I looked for patterns. Patterns of silence, of complicity, of bias dressed up as professionalism. And every time I found one, I bought it, not to own it, but to reform it. To rebuild it from the inside out. He looks directly at Richard. Harlow Dynamics was the loudest pattern of all. The CFO murmurs, You're saying this was deliberate? You planned this? Malcolm nods once. Down to the last decimal. Richard's voice cracks slightly. You set me up. Malcolm shakes his head. No. You set yourself up the moment you decided another man's worth could be measured by fabric. For the first time, Richard has no answer. His silence is louder than any defense he could have offered. Then, from somewhere near the end of the table, Lisa, the HR director, speaks again, softly. Chairman Pierce, may I ask something? Malcolm turns to her. Of course. Her voice trembles. If what you say is true, if you really believe in merit, in fairness, what happens now? Malcolm exhales. Now, he says, we see who's willing to build something better. And who needs to step aside. He looks back at Richard. I'll give you that chance, Mr. Harlow. You have 8 minutes. Richard frowns. 8 minutes for what? To decide whether you'll resign quietly, or make me fire you publicly. The room erupts again, voices overlapping, panic spreading like wildfire. The CFO mutters about stock implications. The legal advisor whispers about NDAs. The PR director murmurs, oh my God. But Malcolm remains calm. You mocked my suit, he says softly, because you thought it made me small. But the thing about humility is that it doesn't shrink, it endures. It waits. And when the time comes, it stands taller than arrogance ever could. Richard's chair scrapes as he stands. You won't get away with this. Malcolm meets his eyes. I already have. And with that, he sits down, in the same seat Richard once called his own. The seconds tick by. 8 minutes. The longest 8 minutes of Richard Harlow's career. You've heard the laughter, the whispers, the arrogance. But stay with me, because the silence that's coming will shake the entire room. If this part made your heart tighten, don't scroll yet, the truth is about to speak louder than any insult ever could. The room is silent. The kind of silence that breathes, heavy, waiting. Richard Harlow stands there, still gripping the edge of the table as though it might save him from drowning. His suit looks sharper than ever, but suddenly, it feels like armor that doesn't fit. Malcolm Pierce sits at the head of the table, calm, centered, the same cheap suit they laughed at now carrying the quiet authority of a crown. 8 minutes. That's what he gave him. 8 minutes to choose between dignity and downfall. And already, you can feel the clock ticking. Richard clears his throat, forcing confidence into his voice. You don't know what you're doing, he says. This company runs because of me. You think the board will side with some 20-something investor they've never heard of? They won't. They'll come to their senses. Malcolm doesn't look up. They already have. Richard hesitates. Excuse me? Malcolm slides another folder across the table. I suggest you open it. Richard snatches it without thinking. He flips it open and skims the first page. His eyes narrow. What is this? Your performance review, Malcolm says quietly. Compiled over the last 18 months. Authored by your own department heads, submitted confidentially. That's impossible. No, it's overdue, Malcolm replies. The CFO leans forward. Is this official? Yes, Malcolm says. Every complaint, every resignation, every allegation that was buried under internal resolution. I thought we'd start with transparency. Richard's voice sharpens. You had no right to access my personnel files. I have every right, Malcolm answers. They belong to the company. And I own the company. You can almost feel the weight of those words settling across the room, cold, undeniable truth. Richard flips through the pages, his voice shaking now. These are exaggerated. Disgruntled employees, misunderstandings. Malcolm interrupts softly. Shall I read them aloud? No, Richard snaps. But Malcolm already has the first page open. Complaint number 1472, he begins, his tone calm but unrelenting. Filed by a software engineer named Daniel Osei. Quote, during the August review, CEO Richard Harlow referred to me as the diversity hire experiment. Unquote. The room tightens. Someone whispers, oh my God. Malcolm turns another page. Complaint 1731, filed by Operations Manager Claire Reynolds. When I informed Mr. Harlow of my pregnancy, he said, well, there goes your productivity bonus. Richard slams the table. Enough. Malcolm continues, unflinching. Complaint 1895. Mr. Harlow laughed when a black intern presented a marketing proposal and said, stick to what you people know, music and sports. He closes the folder gently. That was 3 years ago. That intern never came back. He started his own company instead. And last year, that company's software outperformed ours by 20%. Richard stares at him, face pale. You can't hold me responsible for your words? Malcolm asks. No one else can. Eleanor, the senior board member, folds her hands. Mr. Harlow, these reports were verified by multiple witnesses. The board has reviewed them. Richard turns to her. You're going to take his side over mine? After all I've done for this company? Eleanor's voice is calm but sharp. What you've done, Richard, is compromise our reputation. We've been hemorrhaging talent for years. Do you know how many high-level resignations cited toxic leadership as their reason? 32. In the last quarter alone. Richard shakes his head, desperate. You can't just. I can, Malcolm says. And I will. He opens a new folder, slimmer, cleaner. This one's simpler. It's the ethics audit I initiated before finalizing the acquisition. Richard blinks. Ethics audit? Yes, Malcolm says. You see, I don't buy companies. I dissect them. I study their culture. I listen to the things people say when they think no one's listening. You'd be surprised what truth sounds like in the walls of your offices. Richard's voice drops. You've been spying on us. Malcolm's expression doesn't change. I've been observing you. Every time someone used their title to silence a junior staff member. Every time an employee of color was told they were too aggressive in meetings while others were called assertive. Every time you reminded people that you built this company from nothing, when, in truth, you built it on the backs of those you refused to see. Richard steps forward. You think this makes you noble? You think this makes you some kind of hero? No, Malcolm says softly. It makes me accountable. He pulls out one last document and lays it flat on the table. This is the board's formal motion of leadership change. Effective immediately, you are removed from the position of CEO pending full review of your conduct. Richard stares at it, his voice trembling. You're firing me. Malcolm meets his eyes. No, Richard. You fired yourself the moment you forgot what leadership means. For a moment, no one speaks. The sound of Richard's breathing fills the space. It's shallow, quick, disbelief giving way to rage. This isn't over, he says finally, voice low. You think you can just come in here, embarrass me in front of my team, and walk out as some kind of savior? I built this company. I made it what it is. Malcolm leans back slightly, his tone still steady. Then you should have taken better care of it. The HR director, Lisa, speaks gently. Chairman Pierce, what happens next? Malcolm takes a breath. Next, we rebuild. But before that, he turns to Richard, we need to acknowledge the truth publicly. This company deserves honesty. Our employees deserve to hear what's changing and why. Richard laughs bitterly. You want to humiliate me on a broadcast? Go ahead. Let's see how that plays out in the press. Malcolm shakes his head. I'm not humiliating you, Richard. I'm holding you accountable. The difference is intent. He gestures to the assistant near the door. Please connect the live announcement feed. Richard's eyes widen. You wouldn't dare. I would, Malcolm says. And I am. Moments later, the company's internal communication channel connects. Across hundreds of offices, employees begin to hear the meeting audio. Malcolm waits until the connection stabilizes. Then he speaks, not loudly, but clearly, every word deliberate. Good morning. This is Malcolm Pierce, chairman of Harlow Dynamics. Some of you may not know me, but starting today, I'll be working closely with you all to redefine what this company stands for. I believe leadership should be measured by integrity, not intimidation. By respect, not rank. And by humility, not suits. He glances at Richard, whose expression is a storm barely contained. Malcolm continues. In that spirit, I want to address an issue that has plagued our organization for too long, a culture that rewards arrogance and punishes authenticity. That ends now. Effective immediately, Richard Harlow has been removed from his position as CEO pending review for misconduct and ethical violations. The board has approved this transition unanimously. There's an audible intake of breath around the table. Even Richard's defiance falters. Malcolm pauses for a heartbeat. I understand that many of you are shocked. Change is never easy. But it's necessary. For years, this company has lost brilliant minds because they were made to feel small. We cannot afford to silence innovation any longer. He looks at the board members. Today marks a new beginning. Then he ends the transmission. The room is so quiet it almost hums. Richard finally speaks, voice raw. You've destroyed me. No, Malcolm says softly. You destroyed yourself the moment you stopped listening. Richard stares at him, shaking his head. You'll regret this. You think the public will celebrate you? They'll see you for what you are, a self-righteous opportunist who used race to take power. Malcolm doesn't flinch. Then let them see. Because I've spent my whole life being seen for everything except what I am. I can handle one more misunderstanding. Richard's jaw tightens. You have no idea how this world works. Malcolm smiles faintly. I understand it perfectly. I just refuse to keep it the same. Eleanor rises. Mr. Harlow, you'll be escorted to HR to begin the transition paperwork. The board will contact you regarding your severance terms. Richard glares at her, then at Malcolm. You think this is over? It's not. Malcolm's voice is calm, final. It is. For you. Richard stands still for a long moment, then finally gathers his papers, though there's no reason to. He looks smaller now, his once commanding voice reduced to a quiet mutter. You'll regret this, he says again. Malcolm doesn't answer. Richard storms out, the door slamming behind him. The silence he leaves behind is heavy, not tense anymore, but releasing. Like the air after a storm finally passes. Malcolm leans forward, fingers interlocked. We have work to do, he says quietly. Lisa, the HR director, looks at him with something like awe. Chairman Pierce, what will be our first step? Malcolm glances around the room, faces that only minutes ago were filled with arrogance, now replaced with uncertainty, some even relief. Our first step, he says, is reflection. Everyone at this table will undergo leadership evaluation and cultural training. Titles mean nothing if they silence truth. We're going to rebuild trust from the inside. The CFO frowns. And what about the press? They'll want a statement. They'll get one, Malcolm says. A full one. We're not going to hide behind PR language. We're going to admit what went wrong and explain what we're doing to fix it. Honesty won't destroy us, hypocrisy already tried. Eleanor nods slowly. You're not what I expected, Chairman Pierce. Malcolm's eyes soften. No one ever expects quiet to have a plan. The others exchange glances, realizing for the first time that this young man, the one they dismissed, laughed at, underestimated, had just shifted the entire axis of their world. Malcolm rises. Meeting adjourned. Next session in 48 hours. I'll send the agenda, and this time, everyone reads it. The board members begin to leave, murmuring in low voices. The assistant collects papers. The HR director lingers, hesitant. Chairman Pierce, she says softly. Yes, Lisa. She hesitates. Thank you. For what you did. I've worked here 8 years. I stopped believing anyone cared. Malcolm gives a faint smile. We can't change the past, but we can choose who we become next. She nods, eyes glistening, then leaves the room. When the door closes, Malcolm is alone. He stands there for a long moment, looking at the empty chairs around the table. The same table where he once would have been ignored, underestimated, laughed at. Now, it's his responsibility to fill those seats with people who understand what respect sounds like. He exhales slowly. 8 minutes, he murmurs to himself. That's all it took. And he's right. 8 minutes for arrogance to crumble. 8 minutes for truth to speak. 8 minutes for a cheap suit to become the symbol of everything this company forgot: humility, perseverance, and quiet strength. What they didn't know was that Malcolm Pierce hadn't come to destroy Harlow Dynamics. He'd come to save it, from itself. And that, he thinks, is exactly what leadership should sound like. That was the moment the world flipped upside down, when the man they mocked became the man they answered to. If that sent chills down your spine, share it, let someone else hear how dignity sounds when it finally speaks. By noon the next day, the headlines had already written themselves. CEO ousted in live meeting scandal. Harlow Dynamics secret owner exposes toxic culture. The man in the cheap suit, Malcolm Pierce, and the corporate reckoning. It spreads like fire, not because people are shocked that corruption exists, but because for once, someone powerful actually did something about it. And that, in this world, feels like a miracle. Inside the glass tower of Harlow Dynamics, the air is different. You can feel it in the hallways, that tense uncertainty of a company caught between shame and hope. Some walk with lowered eyes, others whisper, and a few, for the first time in years, lift their heads with quiet relief. Malcolm doesn't hide from it. He walks those halls himself. No entourage, no cameras, no script. Just him, sleeves rolled up, the same plain suit, greeting people by name. The same people who used to avert their eyes when Richard Harlow passed by. Now they meet his gaze. Some smile. Some don't. Trust doesn't rebuild in a day. But the silence has changed. It's no longer fear. It's listening. He calls an all-hands meeting 3 days later. Every employee, from interns to senior directors, logs in. When Malcolm appears on the screen, there's no grand introduction. He begins the same way he always does, calm, grounded, unhurried. I know the last few days have been difficult, he says. You've seen things most companies would bury. But I promised you transparency, and I meant it. We can't fix what we pretend doesn't exist. He lets that sink in. I didn't buy this company to dismantle it, he continues. I bought it because I saw something worth saving, the people who care about what they build here. You've been surviving, not thriving. That ends now. He opens a folder, the same way he did with Richard, but this time the words are different. These, he says, are names. Names of employees who left because they were made to feel small. We've reached out to each one, and they've been offered the chance to return, with new terms, new protections, and a new code of conduct that will make this company a place worth working for. You can almost feel the disbelief ripple through the workforce. He continues. From this point forward, leadership positions will be earned, not inherited. We'll evaluate managers on empathy as much as efficiency. There will be no retaliation for speaking up, no punishment for questioning authority, and no tolerance for prejudice, in any form. Then, quietly, he adds, some of you may not like these changes. Some of you might think I'm overcorrecting. That's fine. You're free to leave. But if you stay, understand this, power is not a right. It's a responsibility. When he ends the call, there's a moment of silence, and then, one by one, people begin to clap. Not loud. Not coordinated. Just a slow, steady rhythm, spreading from one department to another, until it fills the building. And for the first time in years, Harlow Dynamics feels alive. But outside those walls, Richard Harlow is unraveling. He spends the first few days convincing himself it's temporary, that Malcolm's a headline, a fluke, a phase the board will regret once the press cools off. But as the week unfolds, the phone calls stop coming. His calendar empties. The same people who used to rush to return his messages now forget. Reporters camp outside his gated estate. News anchors analyze his smirk in old interviews. Former employees go on podcasts to describe his insults in detail. And every time he opens a social media feed, there's his name, stripped bare, trending for all the wrong reasons. He calls Eleanor. She doesn't pick up. He emails the board. They respond through legal. By Friday, he's pacing his office at home, hands trembling around a glass of whiskey, muttering the same words over and over, I built it. I built it. His wife barely speaks to him. The staff move quietly, carefully, as though living with a wounded animal. He can't admit it out loud, but the thing that really destroys him isn't the loss of power. It's that Malcolm never gloated. Never issued a press release mocking him, never gave a sound bite that humiliated him further. Malcolm Pierce simply vanished into the work. That silence, that restraint, drives Richard mad. Meanwhile, Malcolm is busy rewriting the company's DNA. He forms a cultural ethics committee, employees from every level, every background, meeting weekly to review concerns. No one above the law, not even him. He institutes open-door hours where anyone can walk in, interns, janitors, engineers, and speak freely. He listens. Not just with his ears, but with the patience of someone who's been unheard for too long. When someone asks him why he doesn't move into the CEO's old penthouse office, he smiles faintly. I like to stay close to the ground, he says. It becomes a metaphor, though he never meant it to. But the rebuilding isn't all applause and redemption. There's backlash. Anonymous blogs calling him a diversity stunt. Investors questioning his radical transparency. Old guard executives whispering about pulling out. He expected it. He welcomes it. Because every empire resists its own healing. 2 months in, productivity metrics start to rise. The atmosphere shifts, subtle, but real. People laugh in hallways again. Collaboration meetings run smoother. Employees begin to take pride in their work, not fear it. Malcolm doesn't chase headlines, but they find him anyway. A business magazine runs a profile titled "The Quiet Revolution at Harlow Dynamics." They call him the CEO who listens. He doesn't correct them. He's not even officially CEO, just acting chair. But labels don't matter anymore. Impact does. Then, one morning, his assistant walks in with a letter. From who? Malcolm asks. She hesitates. Richard Harlow. He pauses. Leave it. But after she leaves, curiosity wins. He opens it. It's short. Only a few sentences, written in jagged ink. You've taken everything. I hope you're proud. Enjoy it while it lasts. People like you always fall eventually. Malcolm folds it carefully, slides it back into the envelope, and sets it aside. He doesn't reply. Instead, he gets back to work. The months pass, and consequences unfold in ways no one could have predicted. The government opens an inquiry into corporate discrimination, using Harlow Dynamics as a case study for reform. University business programs invite Malcolm to speak about ethical leadership. Rival companies quietly begin adopting his policies, not because they care, but because public pressure forces them to. And somewhere deep down, Malcolm knows, that's enough. You don't change hearts overnight. You change systems until hearts catch up. But not everyone is happy. One morning, Eleanor calls him in. Her tone is cautious. You should see this, she says, sliding a tablet across the desk. On the screen is a leaked report, a private investigation into the acquisition deal. The story claims Malcolm used insider knowledge, that the buyout wasn't clean. The kind of accusation that can ruin reputations in a heartbeat. He looks at her. You think it's true? No, she says. But the press will. He nods slowly. Richard? Eleanor sighs. We can't prove it. But it has his fingerprints. Malcolm doesn't speak for a long moment. Then he says quietly, let them print it. Eleanor frowns. Excuse me? If we try to hide, it looks like guilt, Malcolm says. Let them publish it. Then we show every document, every receipt, every timestamp. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. And he does exactly that. Within hours of the article dropping, Harlow Dynamics releases every file, every approval log, every legal signature. Total transparency. The public eats it up, not the accusation, but the response. For once, a company doesn't spin the story. It faces it head-on. And while Richard hoped to bury him, Malcolm ends up more respected than ever. The backlash collapses. The truth holds. By the end of the quarter, Harlow Dynamics reports its highest employee satisfaction rate in a decade. The same people who once whispered in corners now lead initiatives. New partnerships flood in. And Richard? He's gone silent. The last anyone sees of him is a photograph, standing outside a courthouse, face half hidden behind sunglasses, avoiding reporters. Malcolm doesn't rejoice. He just exhales, tired but steady. Because revenge was never the goal. Restoration was. One evening, long after everyone's left, he walks to the top floor. The boardroom is dark, empty, the same room where it all began. He stands where Richard once stood, where arrogance used to echo off the walls. And for a moment, he feels the weight of it, not victory, not power, but responsibility. He thinks of every person who endured cruelty here. Every name in those complaint files. Every silence that once protected the loudest man in the room. Then he says softly to the empty air, never again. Behind him, the city lights shimmer, indifferent, endless, beautiful. The world moves on, but something inside Harlow Dynamics has shifted permanently. The company that once celebrated cruelty now measures success by compassion. The man they mocked for his cheap suit now defines the standard for what leadership looks like when humility wears the crown. And somewhere out there, Richard Harlow watches the empire he lost become everything he was too blind to build. That is the consequence. Not that he was destroyed, but that he was replaced by someone who remembered what he forgot. Malcolm never gloated, never posted, never celebrated. He just kept working. Because redemption isn't loud. It's steady. It rebuilds the world one quiet decision at a time. Justice doesn't always roar, sometimes it walks in quietly and takes a seat at the head of the table. If this part hit you deep, send it to someone who needs to remember that silence can be power when truth stands behind it. 6 months later, the city hums with spring again. Inside Harlow Dynamics, everything sounds different now. Meetings run with laughter instead of tension. Names once forgotten are spoken with respect. Promotions come from merit, not proximity. The company hums like an engine tuned for humanity, not just profit. Malcolm Pierce walks through the same glass corridors where, months earlier, people whispered behind his back. Now, the whispers have changed. They're about the mentorship program he started for underrepresented graduates, about the scholarship fund in his mother's name, about how the cafeteria staff now have health benefits for the first time in company history. He doesn't linger to absorb the praise. He just smiles, thanks the people who thank him, and keeps walking. His schedule is still full, meetings, interviews, oversight sessions, but today feels different. Today marks 6 months since that boardroom showdown. And today, the company will announce something that's been in the works quietly, carefully, under his watch. At exactly 9 a.m., the internal broadcast goes live. Malcolm stands at the same podium where Richard Harlow once delivered orders like commandments. But this time, the room isn't filled with fear, it's filled with expectancy. He looks around, takes a steady breath, and begins. 6 months ago, he says, I stood in this same building and made a promise, that Harlow Dynamics would never again be a place where silence protects the powerful. That promise stands. He pauses, letting the words rest. Since then, we've seen record growth in employee satisfaction, innovation, and inclusion. But progress isn't about numbers. It's about people. So today, we're formalizing what started as a personal vow. We're launching the Pierce Leadership Initiative, a long-term partnership with universities, nonprofits, and local communities to fund mentorship, internships, and small business grants for those who've been told they don't belong in rooms like this. There's a murmur of surprise, then a wave of applause. He continues. We've also rewritten our corporate code of ethics. Every executive, including myself, is subject to independent review. We'll measure success not just by revenue, but by retention, well-being, and representation. Because the health of a company isn't its profits, it's its people. He closes the binder in front of him. This is only the beginning. The applause rises again, not forced, not formal, but real. You can almost feel the sound of relief, of belief returning. Afterward, Eleanor walks over. You know, she says, smiling, I didn't think it was possible to change a company this fast. Malcolm laughs softly. We're not done yet. She tilts her head. And you? You ever going to take a day off? He grins. I'll rest when this becomes normal. When fairness doesn't feel revolutionary. That night, he goes home to his modest townhouse. He could live anywhere now, penthouse, mansion, estate, but he doesn't. His neighbors are teachers, nurses, young families. They wave when they see him, not because he's famous, but because he's kind. Inside, the lights are low. On his desk sits the same envelope Richard sent, still unopened since that first day. He looks at it one last time, then slides it into a drawer. Some stories don't need revisiting. He opens his laptop instead. On the screen, an email draft to the staff reads. Proud doesn't begin to cover it. Thank you for believing in what we're building. Let's keep earning it, one decision at a time. He hits send. Later, as he steps outside onto the balcony, the city hums beneath him, a low, steady rhythm of traffic and life. He thinks of how much can change when one person refuses to stay silent. How much damage arrogance can do, and how much repair humility can achieve. He remembers every sneer, every insult, every moment he was told he didn't belong. They used to sting. Now they're just echoes of a world that no longer has power over him. In the quiet, he says, almost to himself. They laughed at my suit. But maybe the suit was never the problem. Maybe it was the mirror they refused to look into. And with that, he smiles, not the smile of a man who won, but of one who endured. Because the truth is, change isn't loud. It's quiet. It happens in boardrooms and break rooms, in late-night emails and small acts of decency. It happens when someone decides that respect isn't negotiable. Malcolm Pierce didn't become a symbol. He became a reminder that dignity has no dress code. He turns back inside, ready for another day of rebuilding. The work doesn't end, but neither does his resolve. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. So if you're listening to this right now, if you've ever been underestimated because of how you speak, how you look, or where you come from, remember this. You don't need to prove your worth to anyone who's blind to it. Just keep building. Keep showing up. Let the world laugh if it must, then watch how silence turns into applause when you rise. Because power dressed in arrogance burns out. But power dressed in humility lasts forever. And sometimes, the man in the cheap suit is the one rewriting the future. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, the smallest voice in the room holds the loudest truth.